was.
And then the wildest part was after that, got up from sitting next to Lisa Whelan,
Yeah.
go deliver that speech, and then went back to go sit next to her again.
It was terrible. Barbara spoke with, what's his name? Jim. Yeah. And he had gotten.
So, you know, it's funny because remember I told you when we did one of them, she was the moderator for me and
I
Margaret.
remember, yep.
And Margaret was very mad at her.
Yep.
At her
She was
attitude.
rude.
But then it was just an attitude.
I know.
It wasn't, she didn't have a deck or, you know, slides. It was just
was
an
a slide
attitude.
deck.
Oh my God.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is now 6:04 on August 13th. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Sandwich Board of Appeals. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the
Okay.
I know they
The
don't.
Board of Appeals is comprised of 5 regular members and 1 alternate member. The Board of Appeals can have up to 4 alternate members. Any decision of this board requires a 2/3 vote. 2/3 of 5 is 4. If only 4 members vote, the vote would have to be unanimous. If 5 members vote, 1 member could dissent. This meeting is live and streamed on Sandwich Community Television's website and on local channel 9. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the SCTV website, www.sandwichtv.org, tomorrow. The board asks that if anyone is recording this meeting, please notify me. Anybody recording this meeting? So none. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of July 9th and July 23rd, please?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. On the agenda tonight is old business, number 24-15, Village Green - Comprehensive Permit, NSG Village Garden 1 LLC, for the purpose of developing 144 units of affordable rental housing, including ancillary infrastructure, including a 4.8 megawatt energy system, a controlled environmental agricultural building, and wastewater and storm systems. Please note, as well as the full board is here tonight, we have Sam Jensen with us, who's the Assistant Town Engineer. We have Judy Barrett, who is our 40B Planning Consultant for this project. Will, her Site Manager, our Site Review Consultant, and we have Amy Questle, who's Town Council. Just a note that, before we get going, a few comments. This public hearing remains open. This is a continuation of the last meeting, and it will be continued again tonight. It's not ending tonight. Where the purpose, for most of the purpose tonight is for the applicant to present their conceptual wastewater plan. And, you know, after that, the board will ask questions. After that, we'll open it up to the public for comment. And again, we would like you just to restrict your comments to things we haven't heard already. You know, we're trying to avoid redundancy over and over again. Everyone's welcome to speak. That's what this is all about. You know, the public has their opinions, the applicant has their application, and we're here just to be fair right down the middle. I do have to read. We did get a comment from the planning board in regard to this project, and I will read it, if you don't mind. At the regularly scheduled meeting on August 6th, the board voted to provide the following comments. Approval not required, A&R. The planning board requests that the zoning board of appeals follows the procedures laid out in the subdivision rules and regulations section 3A that governs the endorsement of an A&R. Scenic road bylaws. The planning board requests that the zoning board of appeals follow the procedures laid out by the planning board for any trees that may be removed within the road layout. The planning board requests that 1.5 trees be replaced for each tree removed, and that the ZBA consult with the tree warden to determine the species and location of the replacement trees. Solar array. The planning board feels information is lacking on the solar field. The massing of the arrays will far exceed the energy consumption of the proposed housing project. It is not clear if the developer will be selling the energy or getting credits. The planning board is concerned the flexibility of the comprehensive permit process is being co-opted to introduce the development of a commercial solar field. Furthermore, the ownership needs to be clarified. The planning board would like the ZBA to investigate if the solar field truly belongs as part of this comprehensive permit. Battery energy storage systems. The planning board would like to see the applicants present a plan on how the noise generated by the BESS system will be handled. The BESS component is not necessary to provide energy to the housing development. Design. The planning board made comment to the Route 130 visioning project initiated by the planning department fall 2019. The planning department, in consult with the Cape Cod Commission and Union Studios, held a community workshop on housing designs. Feedback from residents was incorporated into a document listing the preferred housing designs for more dense developments. The planning board would like to see this project align with the design elements listed in the document. See attached. The planning board would like to, in regard to housing, the planning board would like to see better alignment of the project with the housing production plan and local comprehensive plan. The proposed plan only addresses affordable housing at an income level of 80% AMI. The planning board would like to clarify that at no point have they approved any element of this plan as it has been presented to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The planning board has had several informal conversations with the developers, but no approvals were given. As more information is disclosed, the planning board may submit additional comments to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Okay. And then I just want to acknowledge and have the board agree that we did receive, acknowledge that Mass Housing's letter, we had sent them, we did receive a response from Mass Housing in regard to the changes of the plan on the application, and they are saying they are minor changes. We did also receive, and board members received, a comment letter from the Cape Cod Commission after they reviewed their initial information we received. Everyone got it and reviewed it, correct? Okay. Let's see. All right, and to the applicant, before we get going, we've been briefed by Town Council Amy that you have been sent the necessary documents that Tetra Tech, who's the professional engineering firm that is going to be the peer review group for this project, and could you just confirm that you received the documents and the pay plans that were sent to you? We haven't had any response, and in order to move forward, we really need to know what your plans are. You received the documents that from
I received a copy of the Tetra Tech signed proposal
Correct.
when Ralph sent it to me.
All right, and you received,
Any more about it?
well, there was an invoice, right? Amy, could you address the issue with Rep. Attorney Fitch?
Sure. Thank you. Amy Questle, Town Council. As we discussed at the last hearing, this board voted to go to hire Tetra Tech as a peer review, and I was instructed to get a proposal from Tetra Tech. So we did, and Ralph forwarded that. I thought that I made it clear at the last meeting that the Tetra Tech, the peer review company, cannot start their peer review until the peer review fund, the money is deposited into the peer review fund, which is a Chapter 44, Section 53G fund.
Okay, that's what we're asking. Where do you stand on that?
We understand that completely, but no, I was never asked for anything. And honestly, I expected that there would be either a work session or communication between Amy and me regarding what the menu of items would be necessary.
All the items that would be required, Sean, the engineer, Sean Reardon, outlined in that letter, and that's what they're looking for, but they're not going to start the peer review on all those items until they get funded.
Right. The letter itself, the proposal itself, was framed as a menu, a list of topics, some of which would be appropriate, and some would not. For example, natural resources, as said, was no positions. There was
So, Mr. Chairman, that's actually not the case. We discussed it at the last meeting that we would have traffic, stormwater, engineering, there would be civil engineering, there would be wetlands, so Sean takes the submittal, and he goes through that submittal, and he comes up with this peer review proposal.
Right.
So if, for example, it's a project that is not within 100 feet of any wetland, wetlands would not be included. But that's not the case here. So he has a provision for environmental, he has a provision for traffic, he has a provision for civil. This is standard with 40Bs, and I would also like to say that not only did we go over all of these topics at the last meeting, but this peer review is your peer review. It's the board's peer review. Sean Reardon from Tetra Tech will be working for the board. It's just that the applicant has to fund it, and that funding mechanism is found in Chapter 44, Section 53G. It is found in your zoning board rules and regulations, and it is also found in 760 CMR 56.05, which is the 40B rules and regulations.
All right, well, Attorney Fitch, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but it appears that what was in that letter is what's going to be required when the peer review process starts. And then, once you've funded it, then you can have those discussions with Sean Reardon, the engineer, who put that letter together.
Well, Mr. Chairman, can I add the proposal letter is second paragraph. Each path identified below targets various areas where the CPA may require technical assistance and provides an estimated budget to complete technical review of materials. So whatever we discussed last week at that meeting under the permit regulations, we didn't lay it out in detail as this proposal. So we saw it when it came to us as a outline of projected review that we.
Well, as far as I'm,
So we're moving past that, I'm just trying to.
okay, but what you have in your hand is what's going to be required for you to discuss with Sean Reardon. Once you've funded it, they're not going to do anything until you've funded it.
No, I understand. What we read it as more of a proposal that would be discussed, and we're somewhat discussing it here tonight. We understand your position, so I just
Okay.
say move on, and that's what
Okay. When do you expect you might be funding it?
we'll have to discuss this up front, because there are firm rules of what should be required. Like, for example, the engineering department can't be a traffic report. I would disagree that traffic needs to be studied, when I know the engineering department can study that traffic.
Mr. Chairman, we would be having a traffic engineer
Yes, correct.
that would be reviewing that. They are not in a position to pick and choose what portions of this proposal they are funding.
Correct.
So they need to fund the proposal. If Sean does not, these are estimated costs. If there's any money left over, that automatically goes back to the applicant.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Mr. Chairman, with your approval, may I pick up this discussion with Amy tomorrow or the next day? We'll resolve this.
Of course, Amy.
Sure, except for the fact that there's not much to discuss, because I answer to the board, and the board voted on peer review. So
Okay. So,
I'm always willing to have a conversation.
Representation to the Met and zoning board. You know, I mean, it's cut and paste generic estimate, and they haven't
I hate to, I apologize for reminding the applicant,
Please.
it's being, and this is just a procedural thing. Please speak into a microphone. We do need you to speak into a microphone so it can be recorded properly.
It is absolutely not a cut and paste, Mr. Chairman. There's one, he confused one word, but he goes through the plans, he's very thorough. He went through the submittal, the entire, is it me? Oh. The entire submittal, and came up with this proposal.
That one seems to work.
well, my suggestion
Well-
here is if our town council is, and she knows what she's doing, she's dealt with these people before, and so is Judy Barrett, who is our consultant, I think you guys have to take that as it's written, fund it, and then you can work out whatever needs to be changed, if anything needs to be changed.
We will respond to that, Mr. Chairman, completely. I respectfully disagree that just because it's presented, that it covers everything. The process, the 40B process, calls for some give and take as to what topics really have to be studied and what can be handled in-house. You know, it's all part of, it's a money thing. And that process has never taken place. And quite honestly, that's why, well, no, that's what, the way it was presented to me, it was not, you know, send us a check. It was just, okay, here's something we've gotten. I would use that as a basis for discussion about which of those line items is necessary and which may not be.
Well, every time you,
We'll work that through.
yes, please.
The approach taken here is what I see on every Chapter 40B application I work on. And I've worked on many over 25 years. This is how it's done. The board determines the review that they need. A qualified consultant submits a proposal, and it's funded. And, you know, I'm sorry, the developer doesn't really get to say what the board thinks it needs. The board has to
Agreed.
decide what peer review they need. It's the applicant's job to fund it. It's really very simple, and it's very standard.
Yep. Go ahead, Mary. Please, 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 with the board.
I just want to add that it's really pretty obvious here is that clarity is needed. You have a really good sense of what needs to be done. These folks are not clear, and they just want the opportunity to understand what needs to be done, and I think that's a fair request.
So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to go through the proposal yet, but he has gone through everything in sections. It's pretty clear. And again, just as an example, using, you know, the town engineering department to read a traffic report, I have no doubt that the town engineering department can read a traffic report. However, we need a traffic engineer to analyze their traffic study, which we don't have yet, by the way. We still don't have a traffic study. So it's things like that. We need to have an expert look at these things.
Agree.
We're not far apart in terms of what we approach this. My experience is slightly different from Ms. Barrett, but if given the opportunity to discuss it with Amy, we will come to a resolution. We'll work this out.
Well, what you don't, or you understand, but, you know, every time you have a discussion with Amy, it costs the town money. And Amy has already put forth, and along with Judy, this is what we need, and we need it funded to move forward. I don't think there needs to be any more discussion about that, Attorney Fitch. I really don't. Perfectly clear. So, where are we going?
All I can say, I'm sorry, is that I respectfully disagree, but I also respect, you're the chair, and I will listen to what you say. I will respect and respond appropriately. So we will respond after our meeting on Friday as to when this will be funded.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. We're also, another point, just based on the lack of, you know, any documents that we really need at this point and the peer review that needs to be done, we're going to continue the meeting out to the end of October. But, so we're asking that you'll agree to 70 days for peer review to be secured and the outstanding documents to be provided. Is that, and then will you agree for an extension of time, the 70 days on top of the 180 that we have to approve it?
Yeah, at this time in the process, I could not agree to that. We think there's going to be plenty of time
You haven't
provide everything.
anything that they've asked for, and I don't know how you can say plenty of time.
The meeting, maybe I'm sorry if I misunderstood anything, but tonight's meeting was to be on the subject of wastewater.
Correct.
And I believe my clients have submitted a lot of information.
Pardon me, I missed the end of that.
Say again?
I missed the end of what you said, I'm sorry.
I said, it's my understanding that my clients have submitted a lot of information on the wastewater issue.
We don't have a traffic report yet, do we?
The traffic it's coming.
Traffic is under study right now. By today, they should have,
You told us it was under study 2 weeks ago.
it takes a while. They have to put the meters out and then do the study. Study ends up being, we have 2 traffic studies. If you want those submitted, they're 4 years old, but
Don't install that or until
this intersection's been studied.
Not
And next
interested in
meeting, we're
what's
bringing
4
the
years
traffic engineer with us to go through the traffic.
we want a current traffic study.
We're working on it.
Okay.
A 2-year-old traffic study based on that intersection is going to give us the same result, but we're doing a new traffic study.
In May.
Okay?
Just my opinion, I don't think a 2-year-old traffic study is going to be any good for what's going on now. I mean, this town is changing. But, Amy, can you address the extension that Attorney Fitch doesn't want to agree with?
Sure. So we have 180 days from when we opened this hearing, which was last month on July 9th. And we are faced with confusing and incomplete information. And so what we had intended to do, which we do quite often, is once peer review is funded, we usually give the board and the applicant 45 to 60 days. So the peer reviewer can go through their review. They can discuss it with the as-of-record engineer for the developer. They can discuss issues with the plans, and even that might even give the developer time to adjust some of the plans. Then Sean comes in, late October, Sean will come in and he'll run through all of his comments. And if there was any responses, he'll also go through the responses. But because we do not have a traffic study, we do not have peer review funded yet, we're faced with an incomplete application that we can do nothing with. And therefore, we were looking for an extension of that 180 days, which honestly, I don't think I've ever done a 40B in the 180 days. There might have been one that we were able to accomplish within 180 days. But here, where we have an unprepared applicant, we really need that extension of the 180 days because there's nothing for Sean. Sean can't do anything until the peer review is funded, and then we're still going to be stuck with traffic because we don't have a traffic report.
Understood.
So this is very, very common. It is not an unusual ask. It is not an unreasonable ask, which is to extend the 180 days out as far as we're continuing the hearing.
And Attorney Fitch, your response to that is?
I'm not saying we're not going to do it. I'm just saying I think it's premature. As time goes by, let's see where we stand.
Make if it's premature.
Sorry, Chairman. I fully expect the 180 days to have an extension. Okay, so I'm not saying,
Why can't we just agree on it now?
because the more we keep bringing in specific topics to deal with it, like we're bringing wastewater in today, it's going to be easier to explain the complexity of Pompanesett Bay watershed. Okay, so there were 5 main areas in the selectmen letter of what we should address. There were 5 main areas in the department head letters and Ralph's letter that we needed to address. And then ultimately, it may look like, say, 8 or 10 inside the Cape Cod Commission letter, or even information that you got from Scott tonight about wastewater. If we can just keep the smaller pieces of the 5 main items moving, like, for example, we do have a full set of civil engineered plans. I will admit from last week's discussion about whether we call them Scribner errors or mistakes on the traffic addition and count, there were mistakes in those civil engineering plans. But those civil engineering plans are as complete as they could be when we filed. the stormwater and drainage were as complete as we could file. Those are major core elements of this process that when we fund the peer review, because we're not disagreeing that there will be peer review done, we're just disagreeing maybe on the amount of peer review that had to be done, which I don't really have a problem with what she's saying about peer review. It's just, I think in the 180 days, with now 150, we can manage little parts of it all the time and answer a lot of small things in a very complicated watershed, as opposed to just sitting idle for, 70 days, and then racing in a lot of material, and then, backfilling. I think we can play the extension, which we are, but we would like to keep material going and try to get material in front of you guys as often as we possibly can to explain the issues that impact development in that particular area of Pompanesett Bay watershed. So that's why we kind of carved out wastewater tonight, so we could talk about water quality and what we're really trying to do from a proactive approach in that watershed. And I think when we get through the night and you hear from the expert, you'll have a better comfort that there's going to be pieces of equipment coming into that neighborhood that are a proactive approach to trying to deal with the limitation of water quality and wastewater protection of that watershed. So I just think we can be more effective by having a monthly meeting, and if we get, 90, 120 days out, and we haven't been peer reviewing parts of things like the traffic report, I've done a lot of traffic reports under peer review. It doesn't take a lot of time to understand a traffic report. There's traffic counts that the type of development trigger. Is there more traffic on a road? Might be, but that will be studied, and they're studying it during the week. So if we can keep it into these shorter blocks of time, I think we'll give you better quality answers on a nightly basis, on a monthly basis. And then if we need a month or two to extend it out, great. I would make that commitment right now, that we would extend that.
Yes, please.
Just for the record, the 180-day timeline assumes that the board receives a complete application.
Correct, I understand
You
that.
don't have that.
Correct, I understand that as well.
Just want to make that clear.
Also, Mr. Chair, the applicant's proposal of coming in and presenting topics to you honestly makes no sense if we don't have our peer review here, or we don't have a peer review that has already reviewed it, or he's here to listen to it, because we're probably going to have to address wastewater later once Sean takes a look at it and realizes there's issues. There's also was a comment on the civil plans. We still don't have an engineer of record on this. I've asked Mr. Fitch twice by email, who is your engineer of record? Haven't gotten an answer. We need that so Sean can reach out to their civil engineer for plan changes. We don't even have that. So really, it makes no sense for them to come in, say, next month and discuss civil and discuss, for example, fire engine, truck turning patterns, things like that. It makes no sense to do that if Sean hasn't already looked at it.
No, I agree. So, Mr. Fitch, my opinion is this, and to the applicant, until you fund the peer review and the engineer has a chance to meet and talk with you, and you provide him with everything he needs to provide back to us, we're asking again for the 70 days at the end. And you said you had no problem with it, because ultimately, I would guarantee we're going to need it based on how this is moving along. So where do we go from here?
My decision to make it.
And it's really not my decision to make, but again, if I heard what you just said, Chairman, if you said we're adding 70 days from today to our next meeting, I'd respectfully disagree. If you're saying from today to the end, we're adding 70 days on the end of it, I have no problem with that.
Yes, that's what we're doing.
Right,
We're adding 70 days to the current
end.
180.
right.
I have no problem with that. I just would like not to wait till the end of October for our next meeting. That's all I'm,
Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make the next meeting October 22nd. Now, you got to remember, there's members of the public here. We don't want to waste their time. This is a voluntary board. You're not going to waste our time. We went through this with the previous applicant at this location, and my last note to him was, you know, until you have all your ducks in a row, don't waste all our time, please.
we're not wasting anybody's ducks. In what was required of the filing, we filed everything that was required. In the filing, a traffic report is not required, and the wastewater system is approved at the state level.
Excuse me, I'll reiterate again. We're looking at our peer review engineer. Until he gets everything he needs, we really don't need to go any further. So, it's in your lap.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon me?
I have a couple of questions.
Please.
It's been suggested in some correspondence that we received this week that no limited dividend entity has been formed and filed with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Is that true?
That's correct.
So how can we even take this up if the entity that is required to be in existence to develop this project doesn't exist?
Because it's not required to be set up. You agreed to be a limited dividend organization, and that is the entity that will be formed. So it's a to-be set-up entity, and it happens all the time.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I've been involved in a number of these projects, and we always formed our limited dividend entity before we filed the application. Second question. It's also been suggested that a portion of the property that is being used for this project was not part of the review by housing when you got your initial approval by housing. Is that correct?
That's not true.
It's in their letter. You see their letter?
Yeah, and they said it's part of the approval, and it was in their response letter.
They're saying that you have to modify your application to them.
No, you asked if we had modified, and they said it would be a de minimis modification.
Well, I read it differently, but at any rate, if that property has to be included as part of the review by Mass Housing, then I have a couple of comments that relative to how the project has been designed and how it needs to be or should be, in my opinion, set up. So I'm not sure we're anywhere close to finding what's been proposed on the plans as an acceptable design of this project. And I take into account, too, the comments that I received from the Cape Cod Commission.
Yeah, I've read all the comments, and we're replying in what we have done in the comments. We've actually shown a full build of additional housing on the North Shore side of that road at different times. So that's not on the table right now, a 40B on the north side of the road. We have always been showing to the selectmen a community microgrid because there's a significant lack of infrastructure in the entire area of Forestdale, the so-called Golden Triangle. So the approach has been to deal with the environmental infrastructure necessary to do a development, which is what that microgrid area is. It's the infrastructure that needs to be in that area to develop, and then to that, we're potentially adding housing.
And I understand that, and that was largely the discussion that we had the last time we were here. We were discussing, you know, the environmental impacts of the type of construction, the sewage treatment, and the like. We have not even gotten into a discussion as to whether or not the design of these buildings is something we find compatible with other development in the area, whether or not, I do recall that the Cape Cod Commission made one specific recommendation relative to more open space within the project. I think, and I raised this the last time we were here, that everything was being squeezed into 9 acres, and you told me, well, that's what's been approved by Mass Housing. And yet, the sewage treatment facility and the solar panels that are going to provide electricity for this particular project are not on that 9 acres. Am I correct in that regard?
They have never been on that 9 acres. They've always been on this section.
So they weren't even part of the review?
Yes, they
by
were
Mass-
part of the application.
But were they reviewed by Mass Housing?
Yes.
And how much of that solar array is necessary in order to provide the electricity for this project?
You have to go back to the loads of the EV, which is not in the peer review, so I'd suggest they add that, and then the loads of the housing. And it's all,
Excuse me. Continue, sir.
the area, when you're looking at through the lens of environmental protection, and some of what we would have been talking tonight is the rising temperatures of climate are driven by the natural gas, the coal, and the oil that drive traditional electricity and heating. That's our real existential problem in the country, but specifically in this area of Pompanesett Bay watershed. It's an environmental nightmare. You know what goes on up at the Golden Triangle. It's a little less of a problem here, but it's the similar problems that one at the Golden Triangle, that if you don't first solve for the environmental problems and constraints of the area, then you can't do development in Barnstable County, and you're going to have a problem having any type of economic development and any type of housing development because of inadequate infrastructure. So everything that we're designing in here is from how do we get adequate infrastructures in place to then build affordable economic housing. So everything starts with load and demand.
All right, is that going to be part of your presentation? Because I'd like to...
When we come to the energy system, it is solar, but it's not solar. It is a microgrid energy system which backs up grid resiliency of that entire area. With all the projects that the town has going on the town property, they should be thinking the same way, that these should be energy systems and financially benefit the town, not the big glory energy developers that are just taking the money out of town. Those properties that are being designed at the high school and the elementary schools, with the way the Inflation Reduction Act is now with direct pay, the town should own and operate and provide their own renewable power to those buildings. That's how long-term you make everything more economic, not being part of a variable, rising, obsolete infrastructure and putting in equipment that we're going to be talking a lot of net something about wastewater. You have to be looking at the air. You have to be looking at everything from net zero. And that's what this project is doing. It's a unique project, but we are looking at how can we put in the environmental systems that totally lack in the U.S., but specifically Barnstable County, and how do we take advantage of the fact that financially we are an energy community. First and foremost, we're identified by the U.S. Department of Energy as an energy community. What does that mean? Every dollar you spend on renewable energy, you get a 10% Inflation Reduction Act direct pay to your water district, to your school, to your town hall.
Excuse me. Kevin, is this answering your question or no? I don't think so. Sir?
I think it does.
Well,
So,
again, we're
member,
here-
I know we're all gonna laugh,
Hey!
but again, this is important stuff.
Excuse me. We're here tonight to discuss your wastewater plan, okay?
so,
Excuse me. Amy?
Mr. Corain, I did want to point out one thing, is that under 56.041, it says that to be eligible to submit an application to a board for a comprehensive permit, the applicant and the project shall fulfill, at a minimum, the following project eligibility requirements. And A is, the applicant shall be a public agency, a nonprofit organization, or a limited dividend organization. So you are correct.
That was my understanding.
Okay. the purpose of tonight's meeting was for you to present your wastewater plan, which we will let you do. About how long do you think that's going to take?
Like half an hour?
Okay. And just a note to everyone here, we thank you for coming. Just so there's no surprises, we are going to open it up after their half-hour presentation to the public for their comment, but we will be adjourning at 7:45. A member has other business to take care of, and we have to close the meeting at 7:45. So there'll be approximately a half hour for you people to speak your mind. But again, it's thoughts that we haven't heard before. There is somebody here from the Friends of Peters Pond who wants to present something. We'll let him go first, or her go first, and then we'll take any new comments that aren't redundant from the public. That's what this is all about. But before you start on your conceptual wastewater plan, all right, so on Friday, you're having a meeting, it's going to discuss the funding, and you're going to relay that to Amy as to how you expect to fund the peer review. You are going to agree to the 70-day extension at the end, okay? Those are the only 2 points, Amy, or do we need to?
That's what I have.
Okay. And we are going to continue the next meeting to October 22nd here at 6 p.m. And now you're ready to present your wastewater plan.
I'm John Fitch. I am counsel to the proponent tonight. And I'm sorry, I think we got sidetracked on a couple of procedural issues. They can be addressed and they will be addressed. The Village Green proponent has filed this application for a comprehensive permit, 144 rental housing units under Chapter 40B and the CM 760 CMR 56. The project includes family housing, restricted affordable family or housing, and properly sized green energy and clean wastewater components as accessory but necessary components. This is a housing proposal. It's responsive to today's housing and environmental needs. The wastewater component is not our choice, but there's no municipal or other private infrastructure available. We fully understand and accept the reality that there will be no housing without a wastewater solution. Tonight's presentation addresses the wastewater issue head-on and is based on this understanding. In this case, we have no dispute with the fact that the wastewater is a valid local concern under Chapter 40B. We hope you will be persuaded that our approach is science-based, effective, and workable. We hope you will also be persuaded that the issue is so important that its review in this case should be delegated to the experts at Mass DEP. In this regard, we propose 2 conditions that can be written into a decision and 1 waiver request from local regulations. These would be designed to assure expert review and hopefully approval by DEP only after it is satisfied. Based on the size of the treatment facility proposed, jurisdiction lies with DEP regardless. Our proposed conditions bring DEP into the comprehensive permit. At the same time, the conditions allow the board to avoid having to act as wastewater experts by deciding between our proposal and the attacks that will surely follow from opponents. I have the conditions just drafted, suggested conditions related to this that I'd like to distribute at this point.
Isn't that a little like the cart before the horse?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
All right, at this point, then I'm going to hand or relay the microphone to Paul Cleary to introduce our presenters.
Leanne, could you do me a favor? Could you just click open that pond at risk? So this slide is actually from the Cape Cod Commission, and it's really kind of weaving my way back of the Cape Cod Commission's comment letter to the project, water quality, and how we're going to handle the environmental impact of the project is the primary part of where we start. Some of the other things we see secondary, but you start at that these ponds are at risk, in the words of the Cape Cod Commission. But if you go a step back to the state of the waters for Cape Cod 2023 from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, the Mashpee Wakeby Pond is unacceptable, immediate restoration required. And so really what the point of that is that this no net nitrogen that we are working towards needs to be really kind of a goal of everybody who's doing anything in the Pompanesett Bay watershed, in that we are already severely impaired in our water system in that bay, right? So there's a lot of talk about the intermunicipality agreement between Barnstable, Mashpee, and Sandwich, and really the primary purpose of that agreement is to apply for a permit for the bay.
Can we,
If you don't in 4 years apply for that permit for the bay, you default to the rules we have to follow right now under watershed.
can we get to your proposal, please, for this project?
Yep, so we're trying to save the ponds as we advance forward with no net nitrogen. And the calculations, we have Jim Hotchkiss from Anaru Systems, and he's going to come in and explain the equipment that we're using to treat our wastewater.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jim Hotchkiss from Anaro Systems. I believe you have a presentation on there. Nope. No, there was a PowerPoint presentation, I believe. Okay, that's it. If you could just pop it up in the... Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to try and do tonight is just sort of explain the technology that we have been considering for this project. We do a lot of wastewater reuse projects, mostly in North America, but we do work overseas. Just a little bit. We're based in Canada. We're right across the river from Buffalo. I've been doing these types of systems for over 3 decades. Around a lot of stuff in the U.S. Actually, 99% of what we do is in the U.S. But some of the technologies are very familiar to Massachusetts. Foxborough Stadium was using this technology. The Pittsburgh Convention Center was using the technology. So it's a very well-developed technology. We focus on smaller systems. The technology has evolved into large municipal systems. We tend not to work in that space. We tend to work around the 5,000 to a 250,000 gallon per day systems, so relatively small. sanitary wastewater systems. Next slide, please. Okay, traditionally, wastewater is based on a process called activated sludge. The technology was patented in 1913, and it hasn't really changed very much in the past 100 years. And if you go to any large municipal wastewater treatment plant, anywhere in North America, from Boston to San Francisco, you'll see this type of technology. It has served large municipal sites very well, increased or improved the health of our ecosystems quite well, but it is limited in how effective it can treat wastewater. On a really good day, if everything's going well and there are no upsets, you might get to 10 milligrams per liter of BOD, that's a measure of the organic strength of the wastewater, and 10 milligrams per liter of total suspended solids. More likely, you're going to be 2 to 3 times that. That effluent quality is not suitable for reuse. This is what a typical conventional activated sludge system would look like. Basically, you have primary treatment that removes non-biodegradable solids like grit, sometimes removes fat cells and grease. You then typically go through a biological digestion system, which somewhat mimics your own digestive system. In this case, it's aerobic. So we're using beneficial aerobic bacteria to digest the wastewater. Conventionally, that would then go to a large clarifier where you try to settle the sludge out, and then the clear water would overflow typically into a river or a lake. The sludge that you're trying to settle is almost at the same specific gravity as water. So you really rely on everything working well for this to settle, or you get solids carry over into the rivers and lakes, which we see commonly around the world. In order to improve that, we need to try to prevent upsetting the bacteria in the system. So if you have spikes in flow or spikes in concentration, the bacteria get upset. It's like if you have a vegetarian diet and you suddenly have a Mexican meal, your gut doesn't react very well. This happens with a wastewater treatment plant. So that's why I say if everything's working well, they do a reasonably good job. They do have a very large physical footprint, but the weak links are the low strength of the biomass that's in the system and the gravity settler. Next slide, please. What we're proposing and what we're seeing around the world is the adoption of advanced wastewater treatment, where the BOD, again, the organic strength of the effluent coming out of the system, is less than 5 milligrams per liter, and where the total suspended solids are much less than 5 milligrams per liter. For reuse quality, the standard typically used in North America was developed in California. It's California Title 22, where they look for a total coliform bacteria count of less than 2.2 colony-forming units per 100 milliliters. You're looking at 5-log removal, 99.999% removal of bacteriophage, poliovirus, effluent turbidities of less than 0.5 NTU, and limits on total dissolved solids hardness. And for sensitive environments, low total nitrogen, which is what we're looking at for this ecosystem, and also lower limits on total phosphorus. So that's what we generally mean by advanced wastewater treatment. And this is a standard that is being commonly adopted around the world, from Singapore to San Francisco. Next slide, please. The technology that we're using to do this is called a membrane bioreactor. It was patented in 1974. It was commercialized in 1994, and it's been the most widely adopted technology used around the world, essentially from San Francisco to Singapore. And it has been widely used in Massachusetts, other New England states, and New York. California was one of the first states to adopt the technology, and it's very widely used there. It's the most effective solution for highly variable wastewater characteristics. That's why it works well in places like Foxborough Stadium, where you have 40,000 people there on game day, all eating, drinking, and going to the washroom, and then there's nobody for a week. And so it's a highly variable load. A conventional wastewater treatment system does not handle that well, whereas the membrane bioreactor does. So it's ideal for small communities. We do a lot of resorts and hotels where we get a lot of variable loading, and it works extremely well. Next slide, please. This is essentially the difference that you see with a membrane bioreactor. You still have the same upfront treatment. If it's not biodegradable, you don't put it into the system, so we remove grits and fat, soils, and grease. Then our biological digestion process is very similar to conventional activated sludge. We're still using the same process that's been around for 100 years. The big difference is we use membranes instead of a clarifier. The membrane has a pore size of 0.05 micron. Bacteria are typically 6 microns, so it's an absolute barrier to bacteria getting out of the system. And anything larger than 0.05 microns can't get through. So all the suspended solids are held back. If required, some of our systems, we're looking for complete virus kill, so we would typically use ultraviolet on the back end of that. The technology is designed to handle highly variable streams, to get consistent, reliable reuse quality. So in some parts of the world, this technology is used to basically take sewage to drinking water quality. If you were in Singapore, there's bottled water in front of you there, that would actually be recycled sewage because they use this technology because they have no other water in Singapore. It's a very compact technology. It consumes only about 25% of the footprint of a conventional system. It's extremely modular, so you can grow the plant with the growth of the development, which is highly attractive to developers because they can expand the plant as they get new revenue coming in from the development. It's extremely easy to operate. The biggest problem with conventional systems is keeping that clarifier working properly. And most wastewater operators spend a lot of time trying to get those solids to settle out in the clarifier. With a membrane, you don't have that problem. It just can't get through the membrane, and your only complicated part is keeping the membrane clean, which is basically how we design the technology. Next one, please. So, as I said, we design extremely modular systems. That graphic at the bottom left-hand side, that's a 25,000 gallon per day system that went into a residential development near Yakima, Washington. The picture on the right-hand side sort of shows the mechanical equipment that we use. It's very simple. The pumps that we use to pull water through the membranes essentially are swimming pool pumps. We're using ultrafiltered water, so the total suspended solids is generally non-detectable. So it's cleaner than swimming pools. And so we use very cost-effective, easy-to-find pumps. If the pump breaks down, you can go to any Hayward pool store and put one of their pumps on this system. It will work because they're all 1.5-inch inlet-outlet. Next slide, please. As I said, we've standardized and modularized the system so that they're very economical to build, very economical to maintain. We have standard systems from essentially 5,000 gallons per day up to about 50,000 gallons per day. If you need to go bigger, we just put in another module or another system, so you get redundancy on that basis. So for some smaller systems, we might use 2 small systems to get redundancy into the overall system. The components we use, it's for all of our tankage, we're using stainless steel. Our membranes are polymeric. So the membranes typically last about 10 years, and they represent about 10% of the capital cost of the system. So you're not looking at a very high operating cost or OPEX for these systems. Next slide, please. The top slide on the left-hand side is the membranes we put into a system in Santa Ynez in California. The membranes are hollow fibers. They're capillaries. They're hollow tubes. They're about 1 millimeter in diameter. The inside of the capillary is where we extract the treated water. So the membranes are immersed right in the mixed liquor, as it's called, the biological broth. And we connect the suction side of a pump up to a header at the top of the membranes. We pull water from the outside of the membrane into the capillary. So the water has to go through that 0.05 micron pore, which you would have to use a microscope to see the pore size. Anything larger than that cannot get into the capillary. So these straws, they flex in the water, and that's what helps keep the membranes from getting fouled. We also scour the membranes to keep them from biofouling. The bottom slide shows the example of the one on the left is a biological broth. That's what you would see, that's sewage. The glass on the right is what we would see coming through the membrane. So it's generally crystal clear. And as I said, in many parts of the world, they go straight from this process through an ultraviolet disinfection system, and they can use it as potable water. We use it a lot in landscape irrigation, so without the ultraviolet. So if you went to a Caribbean hotel and you look at the bougainvillea or the hibiscus, it's irrigated with recycled sewage. Your only other option on a Caribbean island is to desalinate water. It takes about 3 times as much money to desalinate water as to treat sewage to reuse quality. California is moving very aggressively into, they're already in indirect potable reuse, and they're moving into direct potable reuse with some of their new projects. Next, quality. So we provide a complete process. So we can supply like a turnkey complete system. Usually, however, we work with local developers to source tankage locally. We don't add value in supplying a tank. So we'll usually tell the client how big a tank they need for the bioreactor or for equalizing the flow, and we focus on the core equipment, the mechanical side of it. We do a lot of greenfield projects, but we also do a lot of brownfield projects. So quite a few of the projects we do in the Caribbean are to resurrect other systems, older systems that have been damaged badly by hurricanes. It's an unfortunate fact of life in that part of the world. Also, a lot of the existing wastewater treatment plants in the US were designed and built using processes that were developed in the late or mid to late 1940s. A lot of them were put in the 60s and 70s, and communities have grown up around them, and so they're not able to handle the loads in many of those communities, and they're certainly not able to provide the water quality that's required by the environment around them, such as with total nitrogen control, total phosphorus. So we go in and we do retrofits quite a bit for brownfield applications. Next slide, please. This is just an example of some greenfield stuff we're doing. This is actually for a brewery in upstate New York. in the Rochester area. We do a lot of breweries. As some of you probably know, craft breweries is one of the fastest growing things around the world. And prior to COVID, there were 2 craft breweries opening every day in the U.S. One going out of business every day, but 2 opening, so you had a net increase. Brewery wastewater is generally about 20 to 40 times stronger than sewage. And so if you have a brewery in your town, it can do nothing but cause damage to your existing wastewater treatment plant. One small brewery is about the equivalent to as much as 200 homes. And so if you start to get a lot of craft breweries growing up in your area, you have some major problems. So we do quite a few of those. Our systems are essentially plug and play, so they show up very easy to connect. It takes about 3 days to assemble a complete plant, like for 20,000 gallons per day, which is the size of the plant that Paul is looking for here. The whole thing could be assembled in 3 days. If you were going to a conventional type system, you'd be looking at months, sometimes years to get things done properly. That's why a lot of small developments are leaning towards these smaller decentralized systems, because they're less expensive, they go together faster, and they're easier to maintain. Next slide, please. This is a brownfield retrofit that we did. That very first slide you saw of a hotel, that was in the Virgin Islands. It was an existing rotary biological system. It's an old type of technology. It was totally demolished by a hurricane, and we went in and retrofitted that plant with a membrane bioreactor. We manufactured the entire system in 12 weeks, and then we put it together very, very quickly. Basically with one of our people and the guy that cuts the lawn at the hotel. So you don't need skilled labor to put these things together. Next slide. This is a very compact greenfield solution. This is actually a very small system for a very wealthy man in Antigua. He didn't want to see the wastewater plant, so he built an underground bunker and installed the entire system in an underground bunker. That one went together also in less than 12 weeks and very low cost. It was a very small system, 3,000 gallons per day, so it was kind of a big villa. That's about the equivalent to 8 houses here. So, next slide. So this is just another example. This is the resort I mentioned earlier in Santa Ynez in California. It's a very complicated wastewater. It's a spa, and so you get a lot of oils that you use in spa treatments and suntan lotions, and so it's probably one of the more complicated wastewaters to deal with, but the membrane bioreactor tends to handle that very efficiently. They did put the plant right next to the spa. So if you're going in there for a $500 spa treatment, you don't want to smell a sewage treatment plant. And so that's why this technology worked very well in that space. Next slide, please. So this is the wastewater quality from that application. The water quality, as you see in the bottom right-hand slides, is extremely clean. The mixed liquor, which is the bioreactor, that's the bottom left-hand slide, that's what a sewage treatment plant typically looks like. The nice thing about the membrane bioreactor is extremely highly aerated. Sewage does not smell as long as it stays aerobic. When you get, when it goes anaerobic, you get the sour gas smells like hydrogen sulfide and the mercaptans, but as long as you keep it aerated, it will not smell. And because we use air to scour the membranes, in addition to the air in the biology, it's always very highly aerated. And this is just a winery we did in Ontario. This one is discharging straight into Lake Erie. It's about maybe 300 yards from the lake. And so it's a very sensitive environment in that area. It historically was very prone to algae blooms. And so the Ministry of the Environment in Ontario was very strict on the water quality that was coming out of this winery. And next slide, I think. Yeah, so this is just a summary of what I covered before. It's low capex, fast delivery, easy to install, and very low operating expense, operating cost. Next slide. And that's the technology we're planning to use. It is very well proven. I've been building, my company, Enero, we just started in 2018 when I came back to North America from Europe. But I've been building membrane bioreactors since the mid-1990s with Canadian, US firms. It is used extensively across the United States. Almost all of the new big wastewater plants in the US are using this technology. The plants that are not using the technology tend to be plants that were built in the 1970s and 1980s before the technology became a dominant product. If you look at most of the developing world, Africa, Southeast Asia, China, they've leapfrogged the conventional plants that you see across most of North America, just like they've leapfrogged the telephone lines. They don't put landlines in anymore, they have cell phone. And so they've all tended to go to decentralized small systems.
Thank you very much. Does anybody on the board have any questions at this time in the process for this gentleman?
I just have one question. I'm assuming that the DEP has approved this, given that it's used at Foxborough Stadium, or is it still considered to be an experimental?
Oh, no, the technology, the membrane bioreactor technology is very well understood by Massachusetts DEP, and by most of the states in the US, actually. In New York, they basically tell people to go put in an MBR, membrane bioreactor, because they know the quality coming out of there is extremely high quality. And actually, our first project was actually at a brewery in the Adirondacks, where it's going into Lake George.
Thank you.
Any questions from you, Judy or Amy, in regard to this, or Will? No? Any questions from the plan?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to public comment, just want to confirm, Amy, that you're comfortable with the fact that Attorney Fitch said after a meeting on Friday, he's going to let you know how he plans to fund the peer review. And then they agreed to the 70-day extension.
Right, we're going to have to, whenever there's an extension or a continuance,
Right,
we need it in writing, and we have to file it with the town clerk, so I'll work with staff on that.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yep, go ahead, Jim.
Just to what Mr. Corain said about the structural or business organization of the applicant, do you see that as a issue that we need to resolve before we continue?
They need to resolve it, yes. Obviously, they're not going to be able to file for an LLC tonight, but I would say that it has to be resolved by our next meeting. It should be resolved as soon as possible.
Thank you.
And if I could add one thing to that, I would think that the land upon which the ancillary systems are located, such as the solar or whatever it is, and the sewage treatment system, should be on land owned by the LLC as well.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to the public for their comment. And again, as I reiterated earlier, if the comments are over early, but we're definitely closing the meeting at 7:45. I'd like to start with Mr. Horsley, who wants to speak in regard to a group of you, so that he can let us know your thoughts. And please sign in, speak into the microphone, and be as short and concise and clear as you can.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some slides, if we could put those up, please. And just for introduction, Scott Horsley. I'm working with the Peters Pond Group, but I've been retained by Hill Law. Dennis Murphy was at the last meeting from Hill Law. He's not here tonight, but we've been working together on this. And I have a brief presentation that won't take more than 5 minutes to go through here, once we can get the slides up. But maybe I'll just mention before we get going, I was interested to hear that the applicant was going to present on wastewater tonight. And I think everybody knows, including them, one of the most important things about the wastewater is achieving net zero nitrogen. I don't think we heard anything about that tonight. The only nitrogen number I saw, and I made a note of it, was a range of 5 to 10 milligrams per liter effluent. That is very standard.
Can you do me a favor and just
Yes.
speak a little bit more into the microphone?
I'm sorry.
No, perfect. Thank
You
you.
did not see anything in tonight's presentation that addressed what I view as one of the most important wastewater issues that I'll get to with my slides. And that's the net zero nitrogen requirement. There was only one slide that I saw that addressed any nitrogen data, and that was a range of effluent of 5 to 10 milligrams per liter. That is a standard range. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of technologies routinely being used in Massachusetts that achieve those numbers. So that's, in my view, there's nothing special there yet. And given what I think the applicant has already agreed to, we're going to need something very special here to get down to zero. But again, I'll wait for my slides, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and grab my water.
I'm sorry, we're just experiencing some technical difficulties. That should be. Okay. Restart. The computer and the screens decided to stop syncing, so we're just going to
I'll be patient.
Restart the program.
I see too many people sleeping back there. I know it's like watching paint dry, but this is a zoning board meeting.
Twice.
Should take public comment while they're doing this. So we're gonna lose them at 7:45.
I know. Yeah, it's there's something wrong here. The problem is. There it is. Right there.
Thank you. If you just go to, great. Well, you can go to the next slide, please. So just in the way of introduction, I do have more than 30 years' experience working in the field. I have qualified as an expert witness in both federal and state courts. I did work very closely with the Cape Cod Commission. We heard about that earlier this evening, to develop the 208 plan. And I'm still working on multiple projects dealing with nutrient reductions in coastal estuaries. I have served on many Mass DEP advisory committees, including Title V wastewater committees. And then finally, I do teach graduate courses at both Tufts and Harvard University in water resources management. Next slide, please. So again, I think it's what I've heard so far. I did listen to the videotape of the first ZBA meeting on this project. And I think we're all on the same page, so I'll just say it again. There are multiple documents, and the applicant, again, has already agreed in writing and verbal testimony that the goal we're meeting here is net zero nitrogen, meaning after the project is built, there'll be no more nitrogen going into the groundwater, into the estuary than currently exists. The map here, of course, is the Popponesset Bay watershed. That is the subject of a report done by the Massachusetts Estuaries Project Report, MEP. There's also an official document called the Total Maximum Daily Load Report. That's published by both EPA and Mass DEP. And then perhaps most importantly for this project, and Attorney Fitch mentioned it, this is no doubt, they're in agreement, this is a valid local concern, I believe was his words. And that's because it's part of an intermunicipal agreement with the 3 towns that commits the town to this no net increase in nitrogen. So I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about what does that mean, no net. It sounds pretty simple, and in effect, I kind of think it is, but again, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So next slide. So what are the nitrogen sources that I see? And I should say as a preface, much as I heard earlier tonight, the application materials compared to other 40Bs that I've worked on here are a bit sparse. There is some site plans, there's a stormwater report. This is the first I've seen any wastewater information, and not to be critical, but that was pretty generic. I didn't see there's no plans for this site yet that I've seen. No calculations for what's being proposed to load to the site. We're talking about projects in all kinds of locations, which is interesting, but I'm looking forward to hearing about what's proposed on this site. So I'd like just to walk through, based upon that limited information, what I see as likely nitrogen issues that the applicant's going to have to bring down to zero. Next slide, please. So the first one is obviously the wastewater discharge. As I said earlier, the slide we saw tonight gave a range of 5 to 10 milligrams per liter. There is one wastewater treatment plant on the Cape in Falmouth, and Barnstable may be the second, that's operating down to 3 milligrams per liter. That's a tough target to hit. It could be done. To my knowledge, there are none discharging 0, which is the required standard here. Second, next slide. So the second source of nitrogen, and I'm presuming this because I haven't seen any landscaping plans yet, but there is a developed part of the site proposed in the site plans that shows housing buildings, related driveways, walkways. I'm going to presume there are going to be some landscaped areas there. So there will be some fertilizers applied. That's a nitrogen source. It's included in the Mass Estuaries Project reports, the TMDL reports that I mentioned earlier. So there needs to be a calculation of how much nitrogen from fertilizers. Next slide. The third one is stormwater, huge issue nationally. There's a lot of stormwater being generated on this site. I did some calculations that I'll show you on my last slide that takes the impervious areas from the stormwater report. And there is a lot of nitrogen in stormwater as well, much like wastewater and fertilizers. So that needs to be accounted for, and that's going to need to be brought down to 0, if that can be done. Fourth one, next slide. And this is something that's not sort of something that's typically looked at because it's unique to this project. The construction of the solar array, which is quite large relative to the site size here, is going to require deforestation, taking down the trees. And I think the first 3 I mentioned, wastewater, fertilizers, and stormwater, are probably things you've heard about. They're in all the MEP reports. They're in the local regulations. But I'd just like to take a minute and talk about this one because this one's a little less common. So if you can go to the next slide. With a large solar array project, this obviously requires taking down large forested areas. This is a very significant change to the hydrology of the site. It also is a significant change to the nutrient dynamics. Next slide. And just to contrast this, on the left we have a picture of a forested area. Now, the MEP report that I referred to earlier and the TMDL report, which are the basis of the intermunicipal agreement, specifically state that in naturally vegetated areas, about 90% of the nitrogen in rainfall is attenuated in the forested area. And by the way, just as an aside, we have a lot of nitrogen in our rainfall in the Northeast. It comes primarily from emissions in the Midwest. It's the highest in the country. The concentrations are actually higher than the target concentrations in Papaneset Bay, if you can believe that. So it's important to deal with rainfall. In a natural state, the forest does that for us. It removes 90%, according to the TMDL calculations. However, in the proposed condition, where we're deforesting a large area, putting in solar panels, there's obviously nowhere near the biological structure to assimilate the nitrogen in the rainwater. So in my calculations, I've treated it like roof runoff, which is in the Mass DEP, TMDL report, et cetera. So I believe the next slide is my last slide. And what I've done, again, the first word on the slide is preliminary, so please take that into account. And that's because I'm only working with the data I have so far, which is clearly incomplete. But what I've done is taken the wastewater flows that the applicant has indicated in the materials. I used 5 milligrams per liter as an effluent. Tonight they said a range of 5 to 10, so I've actually given them a better number than they presented tonight. That works out to 138 kilograms per year discharged into the ground. Fertilizers, based upon an estimated landscaped area, that's another 14 kilograms. The stormwater from the impervious sources that I mentioned earlier is 32. And then based upon, I calculated the area of the solar array. I didn't find that number directly in any of the application materials yet. But based upon that, that's another 45 kilograms per year, which adds up to 229 kilograms per year added to this site. That's 229 kilograms per year more than zero. So I think what's going to be important to hear from the applicant, and frankly, I was hoping to hear some of it tonight, at least for one of the items, the wastewater, how they intend to get there. I'm very interested to see it. It's an aggressive proposal. It might be possible, but it's going to cost a ton of money, in my experience, to try to get anywhere close to that. Maybe they can afford that. Maybe they can't. But I think there needs to be some calculations based on reliable data. And I've provided the reference here. All my calculations are materials submitted by the applicant so far, as well as the MEP report that provides the loading data for each source. I think that's my last slide. I'd be happy to answer a couple of quick questions if you have them, Mr. Chair.
I do not personally know. Any of the board have any questions?
Sure. Thank you. Just a question on the nitrogen loading from the deforestation, which you can you give a little more detail of that, because what it is this is like a third of what the wastewater for the entire
Exactly.
subdivision.
So a little more specifics. So rainwater precipitation on Cape Cod, average concentration is about 0.75 milligrams per liter. The reference for that is the official TMDL report. That is the basis of the intermunicipal agreement. It's not my number. It's part of so 0.75 milligrams per liter in rainwater. The number that the MEP report uses for rainwater that goes through a forest is 0.07. That's about 10%. What that means is, in a forested area, 90% of the nitrogen rainfall is assimilated into the natural ecosystem, which frankly, those of us who have had ecology courses, that's not surprising, because the nutrients are used. So that's in the natural condition. In the forested, in the deforested area for the solar panels, there's no trees, there's no shrubs. There may be some ground cover, but the sites that I've looked at, that's pretty hard to achieve. There's really not much going on there biologically. So the 0.75 milligrams per liter, which is what you get off of roof runoff, that's the number that the MEP reports use to estimate nitrogen from roofs. That's what I use for this calculation. I took the deforested area and I used the MEP number, 0.75 milligrams per liter. And actually, in the slide, I think I was saying there may be a small amount of attenuation, 10%. That's a guess. Because, but that's, obviously, that's not my job. That's the applicant's job to develop a model and demonstrate it with field data on what attenuation they expect to get in the solar array. That's going to be a tough job, but I'm sure they can find some good consultants to try to model that. But that's the basis of, is that a clear answer to your question?
It does. So you're saying there are measures that can be taken to mitigate that to some degree from the.
Sorry, I missed part of it. Say again?
There are some measures that can be taken to mitigate the impact of nitrogen from the solar or from the.
Are there things that they could do to mitigate that?
Yeah.
I don't know offhand, to be honest with you. I've never designed a project to mitigate from a large-scale ground-mounted solar array. They might be able to, I mean, again, if money's not an issue and we're talking probably tens or hundreds of millions of
In
dollars.
other words, it's not an industry practice to do.
No, no. This is a relatively new issue, these ground-mounted projects, and they are changing the hydrology. And it's, in this case, I think it's unique because it is in this watershed that has the net zero. Zero is a low number.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry to say we only have 10 minutes left for public comment from anybody else, but please, whoever would like to speak to this issue, please come up, sign in, talk directly into the microphone, and we'll go from there.
Sign here.
Yes, please sign in, and Maureen, does he need your name? Or
My name's Ethan Schaff. I'm signing in right now. And I submitted, and you have those papers. Okay. So if I could get you, as the first slide, it would be sheet number 9, right there. Okay. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. I was a commenter last time, and I basically pleaded with you to protect Peters Pond. I'm a single-issue voter. I'm concerned about Peters Pond. But when I went home, I thought about whether I had a plea or whether I had something stronger to say. So I started digging a little bit. I'm a former attorney. I've been retired for quite some time. And I found some things that surprised the heck out of me. I then reviewed them with the fellow who you saw his letter, Mark O'Connor. You saw his letter tonight. When I reviewed what I found with him, he was quite surprised as well. So I thought to myself, I might be able to enlighten this board about what I found because I think it matters. So if I could, I'd like to point to the first map tile 47. What we're talking about is Peters Pond and its impact. The impact, the waterfront lots on Peters Pond are inextricably tied to even the first phase of this project, and I want to show you why. If you look, you can tell that parcel 94, it's been called a lot of different things, touches Peters Pond. There is another parcel right above it. I don't know, do you have something that you can highlight that with, or you don't have anything? Okay. So if you look, you can tell that the developer's parcel just barely, right there, touches Peters Pond. There is a parcel right above it, if you could move up, right there. That parcel, I thought, had impact on Peters Pond. As it turns out, it doesn't. I walked into the assessor's office, and the assessor told me when she clicks on that, it is neither developable, or owned by anybody. So it is no man's land. It is literally an attenuation of Sheldon Lane, but it's not owned, it's not impacting Peters Pond. However, the slice that I'm talking about is right below it, and you can see that on the curve, it touches Peters Pond. And next slide, please. That's blown up, so you can see what I'm talking about. Again, if you were to look at Peters Pond, you can tell just that little piece is why I'm here, why I'm so concerned. I live on Peters Pond. So I just blew that up for you. And next slide, please. This is a plan that's recorded in the registry, and obviously every surveyor has to sign something saying that he is describing something that's true and accurate. And again, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. The developer's land, which it shows here at about 10.6 acres, just touches that curve. Okay. Now, if you would, the quitclaim deed. So I began to look in the registry, and I found the quitclaim deed originally going into the developer. And it's just your typical quitclaim deed, except there's, if you now slide it 2 pages forward. George Thompson, who sold the developer the land, was quite concerned about what he was doing. And if you read the full deed, which goes on ad nauseum, you can tell how scared he was about selling this land. He wasn't sure if he was shooting himself in the foot. That paragraph right there, and I'm not going to waste time right now reading it, but you all can read it. I'm just going to take 5-10 seconds to allow you to look at it. The problem is I'm wearing contact lenses and I don't see it so well. I'm going to. I'm just going to give the board time.
We have seen this.
Okay.
We've all reviewed it.
Okay. Hello? Hello? Okay, yeah. So anyway, that paragraph only says 2 things. It says, first of all, that the developer is limited to only 3 lots, 3 single-family residential lots. However, more importantly, what it says is that the developer can give nobody, absolutely nobody, any access to Peters Pond. It talks about an easement in gross. It talks about the fact that any third party has to be prevented from having access to Peters Pond. George Thompson knew how dangerous it was what he was doing. And therefore, in the latter half of the paragraph, he says, only those 3 third-party owners of residential lots can have access to Peters Pond. And that's what the deed says. Next slide, please. The prior comprehensive permit limits those 3 lots even further. And that prior comprehensive permit is applicable and binding. So you can see it was recorded. That's the prior developer. And next slide, please. You can see what I've highlighted. It says that this shall run with the land. It shall be binding on successors. Next slide, please. And the further restriction that was put on the 3 lots is the fact that you can only build a 2,000 square foot house, and it has to have 3 bedrooms, no more. So basically what you're trying to do is prevent McMansions from going up. So what George Thompson did is he tried his best to limit what could be on that waterfront. And next slide, please. You can tell that the prior developer, because this is the old development, this is Village Center, if you look down at the end of the cul-de-sac where there's some blue there, he only tried to develop 3 lots. He knew what his restrictions were. Next slide. This is a blow-up of an old assessor's map when the assessor thought that this development, the original development back in 2010, was going to go through. You can see those 3 lots. You can see the lot above, that's no man's land that I've described to you, and you can see those 3 lots. When the assessor drew the map, didn't even see how you could get 3 waterfront lots, and you can tell maybe 1.5. Can't put 3 waterfront lots there. So, that's the current situation. The question is, what impact will a development have on these restrictions? And this is why I'm so concerned about Peters Pond. The minute the developer puts a shovel into the ground, he is literally violating the covenant that George Thompson puts on him. Here's why. He's starting a 144-unit project, and that project will have loads of tenants. Those tenants will easily make their way down to Peters Pond. Here's why. The land is clear-cut. So it's very easy to walk to the embankment, no problem at all. The question becomes, what happens when you get to the embankment? Next slide, please. Next slide again, right there. I, along with Chris Dennis, walked the property. On the developer's land, there are two paths leading right down to the water, and I'm going to show you how they go. This is path 1. You can see it on the top. Next slide, please. It's a clear path. Next slide, please. It is not easy, but you can easily make your way down to the water on path 1. Next slide, please. The second path, which also sits on this developer's land, is a clear path. It is simple to get all the way down to the water. Next slide, please. You can see how wide the path is, how accessible the path is. Next slide. Next slide, please. You can see that it's even facilitated. There is a rope sitting right there. Next slide, please. You can easily make your way down, next slide please, right down to the water. By being able to do so, anybody who builds on this land is by definition violating their covenant, the covenant in the deed. And I said to myself, last time I was here I made a plea, but as it turns out, I don't have a plea, I have a demand that this board, because not to demand it, would violate the covenant in the lease. And it's a simple demand. This board has no choice, respectfully, but to require that some kind of impregnable fence, wall go up. Because if it doesn't go up, every time another unit is added, you're violating the covenants in the lease. Now, there's another way to protect us. Besides a wall, this board can also require that the 3 lots are alienated, are divested from this developer. Here's why. If it goes to 3 unrelated third parties, they'll have a trespass claim. If somebody goes down there and it's owned by 3 separate parties, there will at least be a trespass claim. So there's 2 remedies here. Either a fence, impregnable wall, or force these lots to be divested. Because to allow the development to go forward with these 3 lots hanging out there means Peters Pond is in trouble. Because with that many tenants, you're going to find broken bottles. You're going to find beer cans. They will destroy the shore. And they have an alternative. They can just go up the street to the public beach in Sandwich like everybody else does and enjoy the water, but not there. And if the board ignores my demand, what's the upshot? Well, if you do nothing, we are forced, everybody in this room is forced to enforce the covenant by lawsuit. But I came from that broken system, and oh my God, is it broken. It will take us forever to enforce that covenant. We will run out of money, and the developer will sidestep that covenant. So I respectfully say, and I'm sorry I've spoken this long, is that you must protect us. It's not that I'm begging. I'm saying that you must protect us. The covenant in the deed demands it with a wall or a forced divestiture, and I'm sorry I took so much time.
Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I noted earlier, I'm sorry, but we're out of time for tonight. We just have a bit of business to finish up, but there'll be no more open public comment. But as I noted before, there's going to be more meetings on this topic, on this application, and there'll be plenty of time for people to speak for whatever their thoughts are. Lastly, in regard to the application that the next meeting, I need someone to make a motion to continue the public hearing on this matter or on this application to October 22nd, 2024 at 6 p.m., being held here at 130 Main Street, Sandwich, Mass., and allow for, and I just need a second and a vote.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, there is no new business. There is no board discussion. There There is no deliberations. There's no other matters to be considered. So the next step is, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.